Hi, welcome back to Intro Foundations of Criminal Justice. Today we're going to be talking about theories. So my first slide, I asked what really causes crime. A lot of folks have an opinion about what causes crime. Some would say it's learned. Some would say it's inherited. Some would say it's their environment. Some would say it's genetic. And some just say there's bad apples. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what is the causes behind people's criminal behavior. The first thing I want to make sure that you understand is a theory is an assumption that attempts to explain why or how things are related, and a theory of crime specifically attempts to explain why or how a certain thing or things is related to criminal behavior, antisocial, not pro-social behavior. Criminological theory is really an empirical approach. Empirical is just a fancy word to say testable approach to the study, nature, extent, cause, and control of criminal behavior. It's using science and the scientific method, so it's objective. It's not from your gut or subjective. And really what we're trying to figure out is group behavior. Can we be able to determine why certain types of groups of certain types of people are more or less likely to commit crime? And when you look at criminological theory, there's the behavior of perpetrators, police, attorneys, prosecutors, judges, correctional victims, laws and policies, and society, spelled incorrectly, sorry, and then other actors in the criminal justice system. But overall, we're going to go back really far and talk about classical criminology. In the mid-18th century, the individuals that we talked about, Cesare Beccaria, really were part of the impetus for the classical school, and they looked at, they would suggest that criminals are without self-control, and that, in fact, punishment should have utility and benefit the whole of society, and the behavior of people that commit crime is in fact their free will. They are completely cognizant of what they're doing. They're completely in control. There's no, nothing else to explain except for the individual just willingly chose to commit the crime. Therefore, Beccaria and his colleagues would say, well, the punishment should fit the crime. As long as the punishment is just a little bit more than the crime, than what they actually got, then we would see deterrence and not retribution. And so again, Beccaria believed the best way to prevent or deter crime was to enact laws that are clear, simple, and unbiased, and then to educate the public, and then eliminate corruption from the administration of justice, and to make sure that when we eliminate corruption from the administration of justice, that we also would reward virtue. So the classical school, the problem with that is, one, not all offenders are alike, and some people might commit crime. The individual that might be starving and want to steal a loaf of bread would never, ever want to steal a loaf of bread, but then the individual that might have 3 Mercedes and wants something else, as a white-collar criminal, is going to go out and steal something. So that level of where we can determine whose free will is different than others is really difficult. In fact, in Beccaria's world, in the punishment must fit the crime. The juveniles are treated the same as adults, which is really quite idiotic and silly because we have a whole juvenile justice system based on the Cook County in Illinois, based on the parens patriae, that we know that youth their brains are not fully developed until a certain age, and so we can't judge them the same as an adult. And then the last criticism of the classical schools, first-time offenders are treated the same as repeat offenders, which really is, again, silly, that individuals that might have messed up, might have made a mistake, a crime of omission, not of commission. So there's a variety of reasons why people commit crime, and to be able to charge the first time with the chronic offender doesn't make a lot of sense. So on the heels of classical came positive, and positive was saying that we positively believe what we know commits crime. And they were saying this from a perspective of being doctors. They were astronomers. They were chemists. They were basing it on biology. They were basing it on hard science. And so they said that, in fact, one is the idea about positive criminology. Positivistic criminology is the function of external conditions. So those are beyond the individual control. So this is no longer the classical understanding of free will. So this is something else: socioeconomic status, their class, the war, maybe famine, maybe even genetics. So it's something outside of their free will. Human beings were understood not as free-willed, as the classical school would suggest, who would do anything that they wanted to do, but rather they were human beings, the actions were determined by biology. And so the scientific method should be used to solve society's problems. And so the way that positivist criminology did that is through empirical studies, methods to study body type, skull size, and personality. The first thing we'll see is the biological theories. And so biological theorists of crime causation, biological positivism, they base their belief that criminals are physiologically different from non-criminals. Early biological positivists believed that the cause of crime was in fact biological inferiority. Today's biocriminologists believe that crime is caused by a complex interaction between biochemical and, in fact, environmental status. And Cesar Lombroso in 1876 published his theory of a physical criminal type. He suggested that criminals are by birth a distinct type, that they can be recognized by physical characteristics. They could be recognized if we just look at their jaws, their high cheekbones, their insensitivity to pain. Some of the other characteristics that Lombroso said was that they had high foreheads. And so I'm sure you're all checking yourselves right now to see if, in fact, Lombroso would have called you atavistic. And so his type would say, he said that we could just simply look at people and be able to predict whether they were going to be criminal or not based on their body type, or based on these different outward examples of criminal being. And so, pardon me, they would say that it's not that the stigmata actually caused a crime, but it was just that the individual was predisposed to crime. So a person is either an atavistic or a result of a degeneration. So atavistic is just the way that Lombroso would call the anomaly. The individual that he could predict was going to be criminal was based on their atavistic. And this the word atavistic means a genetic throwback. So he was saying that there's something wrong with their genes inherently in their heredity, and that's what was causing them to be criminal. Now, after Lombroso and saying that he can physically see you, William Sheldon came along and said, and Kretschmer, but really Sheldon gets a lot of the attention for this, and came along and said that, in fact, semantotyping can show you why the different types of people. And so he would say that there's endomorphic, which is, think Santa Claus, mesomorphic, which would be your athletic, and then ectomorphic, which was the tall and skinny. And these are just examples of what they look. And then Sheldon would say that the delinquents were more mesomorphic than non-delinquents, and serious delinquents were more mesomorphic. And so what he was saying is that those individuals that were muscular and much more able to be, have a lot of strength, that in fact he said that those were the individuals that we should look out for. Under the positivistic model, he was able to predict, he thought with some certainty, that if you had that body type, you were more inclined to be criminal than not. And then modern biocriminology would say that violent criminal behavior has also been linked to disorders in other parts of the brain, especially your brain chemical dysfunctions and brain neurotransmitters. And so you might have heard about this in the news, but the low levels of serotonin have been found in impulsive murders and arsonists. Norepinephrine has been associated with compulsive gambling and other addictions. And then cocaine increases, and other drugs increase the level of dopamine, which activates the limbic system to produce pleasures. So serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine are neurotransmitters, and there's things in our brain that those neurotransmitters can actually cause us to do certain things. So when you are absent a neurotransmitter, or sometimes even have more of a neurotransmitter, then that could be the reason why you would go and do something that seemingly would normally be out of character. And so biology or genetics gives an individual predisposition to behave in a certain way. And so they're saying that there's this behavior is defined as a crime depending on their environmental or social conditions. Most criminologists today believe that criminal behavior is a product of both, of a complex interaction between biology as well as environmental or even social conditions. So really they look at it as a combination. And then the next thing we have in your positivistic is psychological theories, and these are IQ and crime, psychoanalytic theories, and then humanistic psychology theory. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is IQ. And there's been multiple studies about IQ and crime. The bell curve suggests that there's a link between race and low IQ. It got a lot of press when it came out in the early 2000s. It has since been debunked, the idea about IQ and race. However, low cognition, so low IQ, yes, that there are individuals that don't know the difference between right and wrong. Psychoanalytic theories really is Sigmund Freud, and so what his theory would suggest is that some people with unresolved deep-seated problems might be psychopaths. And so a psychopath is someone that's characterized by no sense of guilt, no empathy, no subjective conscience, and no sense of right or wrong. And even though you might think that your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend might be a psychopath, there really is a true formal diagnosis. And it's, some of the characteristics might be some of the things that you see on table 3.2 in your PowerPoints. And then when you talk about problems with psychological and psychoanalytic theories, that these individuals were psychologically sick. The bulk of research on this issue suggests that most criminals are no more disturbed than the rest. Many people with psychological disturbances, in fact, do not commit crimes. So that's where it becomes really difficult to try and talk about those that do versus those that, in fact, do not. Psychoanalytic theory generally ignores environmental circumstances, and much of its theoretical structure is scientifically untestable. That what we mean is considerably unable to be replicated. And to use the scientific method for any criminological theory, it must be able to be replicated. And so that's really what empirical means, is that you might be able to see it and understand it and be able to replicate it. So moving away from your positivistic criminology, now we're going to talk about sociological criminology. And so sociological criminology is based on the relationship between social factors and crime. So remember, initially we started with your free will, and then we moved away from that and said, well, maybe it's something in your brain or something made up in your genetics. And now we're going on to, well, maybe it's something in your society, in the environment. And so Durkheim would say crime is not a function of personal characteristics, but a social phenomena caused by societal conditions. And so there's things in the sociological criminology school that we can point to and say, well, this is different. If you take the individual out of this environment, they'll no longer be criminal. And so Durkheim argued that crime is in fact a social fact. The cause of crime is anomie, and this just means normlessness. So anomie means normlessness, and the disassociation of the individual from the collective conscience or the general sense of morality. So crime is a function for society and marks the boundaries. Durkheim advocated containing crime within reasonable boundaries. And so he would say that researchers began to look at the conditions of cities and the impact on crime. And so this is the Chicago School. And they would say that the bottom line was that the crime was a function of where they lived, that there were natural areas for crime, in fact. And the individual's relationship to that important societal process, education, family life, peers, that's the key to understanding human behavior. In fact, these were the first ones that said, let's go ahead and remove individuals from this area and see if they're criminal. And if in fact, they're not criminal, then it's something about the environment, and that's really what they found. The theory of the Chicago School found that neighborhoods which experienced high delinquency rates also had what we would call social disorganization. Social disorganization, it might be something where you're now, if you live in an apartment or you're renting around college students, essentially, the fact is, if a dog poops on your lawn now, do you pick it up? Do you pick up trash? A lot of times when we talk about social disorganization, it's individuals that don't either know their neighbors, they don't care about their grass, they don't care about the outward appearance of their house, which then tells others, well, since they don't care, I don't care, so I can actually go and burglarize this home. So when we look at social disorganization, the usual controls over delinquents are largely absent. The delinquent behavior is often approved of by parents as well as the neighbors because it's supported by the environment. It's okay to drop your your needles, your meth needles, or your meth spoons, or, your cocaine paraphernalia. And there are opportunities for a lot of delinquent behavior because people just don't watch out for each other. This is a lot different than if you think about the home that you might have grown up in, that the size of the home doesn't matter, but the fact whether you had a nosy neighbor or you had somebody that knew who belonged on that street, and there wasn't so much transiency like there is when you rent, where you're constantly coming in and out, you don't know who belongs in that spot. And so essentially they would say that that transiency really speaks to disorganization. And so you look at the concentric zone, and so over here is the water. In Chicago, it's the lake. And then you would see that those folks that lived under the smokestacks of the urban development in that first zone, that central business zone, that they weren't there by choice, they were there by constraint. And then you look in the next zone, and that's called the transitional zone. And that's where we saw a lot of deteriorated housing. We saw a lot of factories, a lot of abandoned buildings, as well as housing. And so individuals didn't want to be there, so they would be there just for a little bit. But the reality is, when they were in that zone, they didn't know their neighbors, they didn't pick up the trash, they really didn't protect each other. There was no nosy neighbor. Believe it or not, I think I might have said it before, a nosy neighbor is probably your best bet for for crime prevention. And then your third one is your working class, and then you get to residential and then commuter. And essentially what they found is that if you have, they did this theory on boys, and if they look at police records here, and if you follow those kids that end up moving out, maybe they won the lottery and they moved out, maybe their family got a better job and they moved out, but those kids that once moved out of this transitional zone, guess what happened? They were no longer criminal. They were no longer delinquent. So what they would say is that there's something about the transitional zone, the fact that there's heterogeneity, which means that people are all different. So you have, next to you, you might have somebody that likes curry, and then somebody next to them that really likes pineapples, or somebody next to them that really likes, fish. And so all of these different foodstuffs, while I'm not saying that that's making it criminogenic, but I'm saying that individuals that come together that don't have a lot of things in common, whether it be religion, values, mores, and that sort of thing, that when you have these coming together and it's a zone in transition and they're really unable to, they don't look out for each other. And so that causes a lot of disorganization, and folks are more likely to be criminal there. So that would be your first sociological theory. And your another one would be Robert Merton in 1938. He talked about the cultural goals and social structure. He called this anomie. Merton argued that the limited availability of legitimate institutionalized means to wealth put a strain on people. And some students, some undergrads can really understand this, that, you are really looking forward to a job. You're working on your career right now. You're okay maybe not having a lot of money now, because at the end, you hopefully will get a good job. Well, the difference in your position now, even though you might feel, a little bit strained, it's different than individuals that don't have an out. They don't have a goal. They don't have a way to get to college. So I always say, even though it stinks that you have college loans, the reality is be grateful that you have college loans, because you're really looking to do something better. And then anomie theory would say that these juveniles are unable to achieve status through socially acceptable means. So they do one of the two things. Number one, they conform to middle-class values and resign themselves to their inferior status. Or two, they go ahead and rebel, and they establish their own values and structures, and they find themselves to form different groups and validate and reinforce the new values. And so this is where we see those youthful delinquents, that they're more likely to commit crime when they find others that are similar to them. And so they've identified three gang subcultures: criminal, they're formed to make money; violent, formed to actually vent anger; and then retreatist, those who can't join the other gangs become alcoholics and drug addicts. And so really what anomie is saying for Cloward and Olin, they were saying that because not everybody has the same ability and opportunity. Now, you might be saying, well, I buy the crime in American Dream. The American Dream, where everybody just pulls himself up the bootstraps. And I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to tell you that is not well research, not well established. In fact, when you look at those folks that are admitted into Ivy League schools, guess what? They're legacy people. So they're individuals that maybe their parents did. So it's not everybody has an equal chance of getting into an Ivy League school. It only works well if somebody else in your family has gotten into an Ivy League school. Individuals that are more likely to have money have different opportunities. It's not that everybody is given the exact same opportunities, whether it's from your family, it could be from your brain, your genetics, but at the end of the day, everybody wants that American dream, and then those that are blocked get strained and have anomie, and they're the ones that are going to commit the criminal behavior. Economic structure, so this is talking about socioeconomic status, that the underclass or the culture of poverty, these are chronic poverty individuals. So these are not a college student for 4 years and I can't buy more than 4 beers on one night because I don't have the money. This is chronic poverty. These are individuals that have had generations of poverty. And those folks that live in poverty develop an attitude of cynicism, helplessness, mistrust of government agencies and police. And so when we look at the economic structure of crime, that this really does a good job of explaining why some people in urban areas are more likely to be criminal. Why? Because they have, from the social disorganization concept, they have deteriorated neighborhoods, they have inadequate social control, they have conflicting social values or mores that lead to criminal behavior. Or you take it from the strain or enemy perspective, and they say crime is a function of the conflict between these goals and these means. And so what that means is that I have a goal. My goal is to be successful in the United States. Well, my means, it's not even. Everybody has different footsteps, right? So whether you have the legacy or whether you have people that have lots of money or you've inherited lots of money, that's not equal to other individuals. So the idea is that this unequal distribution of wealth, this leads to that power struggle, that strain, and individuals go ahead and commit crime. Another sociological theory that we talk a ton about will be learning theories. And essentially learning theories, Ed Sutherland is probably the best one that talked about it. And so this is not social disorganization. This is differential association. So this is, you can think of it as DAT theory, D-A-T. So we talk about a differential association theory. So DAT says that persons who become criminal do so only because of context with criminal definitions and isolation. So this theory modified remains one of the most influential theories of crime causation. In fact, Sutherland's differential association would say that people learn, in fact, how to be criminal. So the same way that you learn how to ride a bike, you learn how to be a bank robber. Right? So learning theory would suggest that babies are not born thinking that they know how to open up a safe, right? So they've been taught that. And so if only we can get you to not hang out with folks that are teach you these bad things, then lo and behold, you won't have the ability to be criminal. So peers are hugely impactful in the criminal justice system. And learning theory would argue that people commit crimes because of imitation, or they get positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is the presentation of a stimulus that increases or maintains a response. Negative is the removal or reduction of a stimulus whose removal or reduction increases or maintains a response. And just think about those kids that maybe you knew growing up that are likely to steal from, whether it be the bookstore, it could be, a 7-Eleven if you had those growing up near you, but some convenience store. Why did they steal? Why did they continue to steal? Because they never got caught. And so that reinforcement, once they finally got caught, then they would have a negative reinforcement. And if they were caught and quickly sanctioned, then they would be less likely to continue to commit the crime. Learning theories are among the policy implications to punish behavior effectively. So, a lot of folks would say this isn't done effectively in the United States. Probation doesn't function as an aversive stimulus. So a lot of times on our probation in the criminal justice system, a lot of folks would say it's a slap on the wrist. I don't agree with that all the time, but overall. And then, in fact, most offenders are not incarcerated. And so remember, for us to change up those stimuli, those positive and negative reinforcements, we need to make sure that individuals feel the pain. And then this one's super important. Punishment is not consistent, nor is it immediate. So in the United States, we do such a great job of policing folks that we have a ton of people in the criminal justice system. And so we cannot do immediate, it's really difficult for us to do immediate types of punishment. And then offenders are generally returned to the environments in which they were committed. And if you believe in the sociological theories, that environment does impact it, you're just putting them back into the fire. All right. And then social control theory. So social control is a little bit different. It looks at theory a little bit different. It says not why do people commit crime, which is what all the other theories we've talked about so far today do, but it's why don't they? And so social control theories really asks, why do people in fact conform? And so Travis Hershey in 1969, he has two really big books, but the one that we'll focus on today is 1969 Causes of Delinquency. And what he really said is that there's something about that everybody is really, for the most part, they have a strong bond to society. They have an attachment to others. They have a commitment in conventional lines of actions. They have involvement in conventional activities and a belief in the moral order, and some people say in the criminal justice system. Well, he says that's how we're all born. But what happens to commit crime is that the attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief, these four social bonds break down. And once they break down, then folks are free to do what they want to do. And so most people are influenced by their surroundings and the people that are surrounded with them. And so social control theories, again, the big thing for that is that, pardon me, let me go back one, is these attachments. And so they would say, one that's tested a lot is attachment. So they would say, is there someone, anyone in your life that cares? So it could be a grandmom, it could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a parent. So if you don't come home tonight when you were younger, did anyone care? Right? And if not, then you're going to just go ahead and commit criminal behavior because you're free to do that. That bond is broken. But if you have these bonds of attachment, commitment, involvement, belief, these social bonds are what's causing you not to, in fact, commit criminal behavior. And then this is just more recently, Mike Hershey and Travis Hershey and Mike Gottfredson also wrote a new book about low self-control that I'm not going to talk about today. And so for the most part, that's really theories in some. I definitely need you to hit the high points that I talked about here. So making sure that you understand social disorganization, differential association, social control theories, making sure you understand the difference from classical to positivist to sociological theories, and then understanding what truly is a theory and how it's so important that we need to understand why people are committing criminal behavior. Because if we could figure out the theoretical rationale as to why they are, then we could actually do some impactful actions at a societal community level. Thank you.